Due to some unforeseen circumstances, our guest speaker, Jennifer LaGarde, was unable to come today. So she very generously made a short presentation of about 10 minutes for us to watch. And so what we're going to do is watch that together, and then we'll begin our discussion. So I want to tell you a little bit about Ms. LaGarde. I'm a big fan. She's also known as Library Girl. She has a great sense of humor along with her expertise. She's a lifelong teacher and learner with over 20 years of experience in public education. Her educational passions include leveraging technology to help students develop authentic reading lives and meeting the unique needs of students who live in poverty, and helping learners of all ages discern fact from fiction in the information they consume. She's a huge fan of young adult literature, as am I, and she currently lives, works, and reads and drinks a lot of coffee, her words, in Olympia, Washington. She's the co-author of 2 books, Fact versus Fiction, Teaching Critical Thinking in the Age of Fake News, and most recently released in 2021, Developing Digital Detectives. And both of these books are co-authored with Darren Hudgens. So without further ado, let's watch Ms. Jennifer LaGarde. She's given us a wonderful presentation, which I think will really provoke some good dialogue and help us figure out some tips and tools for navigating the information highway. Thank you for joining us.
Hi everyone. I'm so sorry that I can't be with you live today, but I'm so very grateful for the opportunity to share some information that will hopefully help inform some of your later conversations. You know, I've been involved in media literacy work now for nearly a decade in some capacity or another. And if there's one thing that I truly believe lies at the heart of our collective inability to determine fact from fiction in the information that we consume online, it's the ways in which our emotions are leveraged to get us to engage with digital content. Now, to fully understand this, we actually have to take a step back and think deeply about how the internet has changed everything about how we access, interact with, and internalize information. So I hope you'll come along with me first for a little history lesson. Back in the day, content creators and journalists made money through subscriptions and advertisements. But right around 2007, which is coincidentally also the time when the first smartphones were invented and when social media platforms first started going mainstream, we as a society also decided that information should be free. The internet exposed all sorts of ways for us to access content without a traditional transaction. So we all just decided to stop paying for it. And this has had a variety of consequences. For example, did you know that only about 40% of the news outlets that existed in 2007 are even still around today? And because it costs so much to pay journalists to investigate and report on the news, those news outlets that do still exist tend to focus more on editorial content, which is to say that they hire people to give their opinion about the news rather than hiring those people who actually investigate and report it. But most importantly, this shift to a world in which we expect information to be free has forced all content creators to devise new ways of making money. And that new way is through clicks. When we double tap on a post to like it, to show that we like it, when we comment or share information online, when we press the follow button in order to stay connected with specific people or information outlets, we are helping them make money for their products. And these clicks are hugely important because it takes thousands and thousands and thousands of them in order for content to become profitable. Which means that all content creators, from the trained journalist to the social media influencer and even the online troll, all of those people have, at least in part, the same goal, which is for their post, their story, their video, etc., to be the one that goes viral. And this is where the emotion kicks in. Marketers have for decades understood that one of the most effective ways to get consumers to buy a product is to trigger an emotional connection between the good and service and the consumer themselves. In fact, they've identified what are sometimes referred to as the big 6 or the big 8 emotions that are most likely to get consumers to buy. Those same emotions, anger, fear, a feeling of superiority or being better than someone else, hatred, even envy, those are the same feelings that also get us to click on content online. Now, let me throw a crazy statistic at you. Back in 2018, MIT did a study to understand how information travels online, which resulted in 2 really interesting and important findings. First, that on average, people only spend about 8 seconds evaluating information before they react to it. And second, MIT found that false content featuring disinformation travels 6 times faster than boring old facts. Now, even though I'm not there with you all, I can see some of you shaking your head as you hear that, because it's frustrating to think about how quickly we share information without verifying it. But it's also not that tough to understand why that happens. Because as we've already said, all content creators need theirs to be the stuff that goes viral. It's become a common practice to embed emotional triggers at every access point to that information. Headlines, images, captions, etc. are all designed to trigger one of those emotions, the ones that will get us to click. And what's more, people with nefarious intentions, those with the goal to spread disinformation and influence our decisions, those folks make sure that their content is especially triggering because they know that once the emotion takes over, it becomes the driver. This also explains why bad actors create bots and programs or even pay people to engage with and comment on their posts, because that's another opportunity to add a potential emotional trigger to what the consumer, that's us, remember that's us, experiences. When we spot something that makes us feel things and then we see thousands, even millions of comments that reinforce those emotional responses, that feeling-fueled wildfire quickly grows to a point where we can no longer control it. And y'all, we all know what this feels like. We know what it's like to be innocently scrolling through our social media feed and stumble across something triggering and then feeling compelled as a result to share it. So what we actually have to do then is retrain our brains to recognize when we're being triggered, to be able to identify those feelings, but more importantly, to see those emotions not as a signal to react, but as a signal instead to press pause. And then ask ourselves some really important questions like, 1, how does this make me feel? Identifying the emotion is important. 2, who benefits from me feeling this way? 3, what are those people hoping I'm going to do? What are they banking on me doing as a result of those emotions? And finally, and most importantly, what are some healthier choices I can make instead? And I use the phrase healthy choice here very intentionally because the spread of disinformation doesn't just result in us being misinformed. It also has a number of other deeply personal consequences. When we like, share, or comment on content that is false, we're amplifying it, both on our own timelines and on the timelines of others. This is because the more content is engaged with, the more social media platforms promote it. Our clicks aren't just telling the person who created it that we're buying what they're selling, literally, but it's also sending that same message to the platform and even to the device that we're accessing that information on. In response, the algorithms that are the secret sauce behind those tools go to work giving us more and more of that same type of content. And because the content that we first clicked on triggered a strong emotional response in us, the stuff that follows it will likely do the same and probably even more intensely. And here's where it gets personal. Because information is so deeply tied and connected to our emotions, we internalize it. It begins to affect how we see ourselves, how we identify ourselves, and how we see and identify other people. When we believe something fiercely, it becomes part of our identity. And when people disagree with or disparage those beliefs, we take it personally. It's like they're disagreeing with and disparaging us. And as a result, we begin to identify them negatively and even as an enemy. Which leads us back to 2021, in a world where we feel more divided than ever, where having a conversation about a current event feels dangerous, and where we allow the content that we see online to influence decisions that affect our health, our relationships, how we treat each other, and how we work together or don't to solve some of the huge problems that we're facing as a species. But here's the good news, y'all. If the problem with disinformation isn't really about technology or even about big scary enemies and is really about us and about how we let emotions control our decisions, then that also means that the solution to disinformation, at least in part, is within us as well. So, today, as you think deeply about how to get a handle on how information affects our ability to communicate with one another, I encourage you to be frank and honest with yourself and with others about the times when you felt triggered by information and about how those emotions drove your decisions. But most importantly, I challenge you to brainstorm some strategies for A, seeing those emotional responses as a signal to press pause, and B, identifying steps that can help you navigate those emotions so that you can more thoroughly investigate information before you share it or even decide to abandon it, rather than allowing it to control how you interact with the world. So, the work y'all are doing today is so important, and I'm honored to even be just a tiny part of it. I wish you all the very best of luck today, and I can't wait to hear about your conversations.
I'd like to read one sentence from the transcript before we begin our conversation, okay? So, in the very beginning, Jennifer LaGarde says, "If there's one thing that I truly believe lies at the heart of our collective inability to determine fact from fiction, in the information that we consume online, it's the ways in which our emotions are leveraged to get us to engage with digital content." So, what did you think?
Well, she definitely brings up a lot of good points when you start to look at understanding the type of conditioning that the information superhighway has on us, because let's be frank, we live in a society where we have literally a information superhighway available at our disposal, whether it be through smartphones, which I think is the most common type of access point to this information, and certainly the internet, certainly social media is also complicit in how information gets to us. And the interesting thing is, and I don't think any of us truly realize it, and I don't say that because of any, it doesn't come from a negative place, but just looking at my own experience with information and how I process the information, she really did touch on a lot of really great points. The first one being the fact that we are conditioned by the information that we consume. And as a result of that, we generally tend to reproduce that information, thus indoctrinating others or conditioning others who are like-minded as we are. Right. So, look, the fact of the matter is that our understanding of how of our belief system really does impact the type of information that we consume.
Yes.
Right. We generally, and of course, those of you who are out there, please feel free to chime in or speak, type in the chat or speak over us. But we generally tend to gravitate towards sources whose reality parallels our own. Right, whose ideas are consistent with our own ideas.
And the platforms, some of the platforms that you mentioned, also perpetuate that. In other words, the algorithms that social media and certain websites use tend to reproduce the kinds of information that we seek or respond to or like or share.
Right.
And so the algorithms, and so a lot of times when I'm working with students, what's the difference between searching on Google and searching on an academic database or a school database? Well, Google, your browser, even your device, Ms. LaGarde reminded us to think about, perpetuates and reproduces what you've liked in the past. Correct. Because it's trying to satisfy you and it's trying to engage you. So if you like one thing, it's like a good shopkeeper getting more of the product that you like. And so what you're pointing out is that this perpetuates our thinking as well as then perpetuates what we receive.
Absolutely. And we are bombarded with these algorithms with other things that serve to solidify our belief system. Look, for the longest time, and I'm not big on social media, and I see some people
there's a comment. Yeah,
I
great.
definitely want to address Mr. Jackson and Ms. Berry, but for the longest time, and I'm not big on social media, but I thought that like my computer was possessed. Because every time I would look up something on Google, I'd log into one of my social media sites and boom, there'd be the exact same thing I looked up or something that's similar.
Right.
Mr. Jackson says we should recognize the limitations of social media, not assuming it will accomplish something it's not able to.
So, Mr. Jackson, would you care to elaborate on that a little more? Do you feel comfortable taking your mic off and explaining maybe what some of those assumptions might be?
I just think that we get caught up too much in like the presenter talked about. We get caught up too much in the moment when we're on different websites, and it's like we have to. Well, I know for myself, I'd have to restrain impulses a lot of times because I know they're just not right. But I also know more about these algorithms. You know, I've read a lot of stuff about these algorithms, so I'm knowledgeable as far as that goes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And if there's one tip about the algorithms working, are we correct that sort of like begets like? Just for the sake of conversation, is that fairly accurate?
Oh, exactly. It just brings you further in.
Okay, so it's a little bit like confirmation bias, which is a theory that, well, Ellie, I'm going to leave this to you.
Yeah, so
the definition of confirmation bias.
Right. Well, biases by definition, and I'll paraphrase, of course, because I don't have the formal definition in front of me, but it is pretty much attributing a universal identity to a group. So from a holistic standpoint, you attribute one characteristic, be negative or positive, because biases can be both. Biases can be negative, as in, all fill in the blank are fill in negative characteristic.
All puppies are beautiful.
Right. Exactly.
So some biases aren't necessarily bad.
Of course, but biases nonetheless, and I don't believe it makes it any less destructive in any way, shape, or form. I believe that it puts people into a box that they may not necessarily belong in. And then as a society, we kind of chastise them when they don't fit into the paradigm that we think they should fit in.
And it limits our creativity.
It definitely limits our creativity. And I think Mr. Jackson said something very important, how sometimes he has to restrain himself. Mr. Jackson, it is he, right? Your pronoun, sir?
Correct.
All right. Okay. I don't want to assume. I don't want my bias to, kind of take over. But yeah, like Mr. Jackson pointed out, sometimes he has to show restraint, and I believe that that's an example of somebody who's a healthy consumer of information.
Well, and it puts me in mind of that moment where we're advised to pause. And so, Ms. Berry, you notice this when you're shopping, that if you're looking for something, you get more of it?
Yes, what I notice is when I'm looking for something, and then later on in the day, I might be on a social media site, and then a pop-up will will just show up about something that I was looking for yesterday or the day before. You know, I mean, it even happened once when I was in a conversation. I was, excuse me, I was near my phone and I was just talking about something that I was looking for. And the next thing I knew, I started getting pop-ups about similar things.
Very quickly.
It was very interesting. That was a little spooky, though, I have to admit.
So this is the marketing aspect of it. And we've heard from a student as well. So Miss Destiny, have you felt the same way? What do you care to say a little bit more about that?
I felt the same way how Mr. Espinoza felt, like how when you look up something and then next minute you find somebody else was looking it up, or it just pops up randomly, or when you're talking about it with your family members and somehow it pops up on your phone.
Interesting, yes. And so it's not so random. These are the algorithms that our social media platforms and that our browsers and even our devices are using in order to give us the content that we seem to be seeking. Has anybody noticed something like this outside the realm of shopping? For example, if you, well, I get a lot of library information. So when I go to Google, Google sort of knows that I'm interested in books and libraries and that this is most likely what I'm after. So it steers the results that I might get. Has anybody noticed something similar to that, or around news stories, for example? When you follow if you follow sports and something happens to an athlete, do you find that those stories come? So again, we're getting some affirmation in the chat. Does anybody care to comment on that?
Hello, my name is Elise.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, I definitely see that on a daily basis, not only I work in healthcare. So if I start to search for something in regards to radiology, you know, I do get more of that information. But I think it also, in terms of all aspects, not just when you look for an item to shop for, but also things that are come up politically. You know, if you're interested in something and you search for that, then you're going to continue to get more of the same, and then you start believing everything that you're seeing, and then it starts to then alter the course of your views about what's happening and what's going on. But it was really interesting that you brought up the whole point about taking a pause, taking that moment to think and not necessarily digest everything that you're seeing.
So if we are to accept Ms. LaGarde's challenge and begin to strategize together as a group, the first thing she recommends is pause. And so what's another step after that moment of pause? So we have a strong reaction for or against. Is something we identify with or something we reject, something that evokes an emotion like fear, anger, anxiety, hope.
Well, I think
what's our next step?
I think the pausing piece is great. And I think Ms. King really, I think she definitely struck a chord here because, and we're not going to get into political things, but I think the fact that Ms. King brought up politics, I believe that pausing and just kind of processing before we continue and perpetuate the information that we have received, I think that's critical in becoming a healthy consumer of information and a healthy distributor of information as well, because we are distributors of information.
That is
correct.
We
don't even have to speak in order to distribute information. All we have to do is click a mouse.
So I really want to reemphasize this point that Ellie is making. We co-create information when we like and when we share. So we become contributors. So not only are we consumers when we are on a social media platform, for example, and we share something out or we write a comment, we participate, we are also co-creators of that information. So
we
that's
become
an
the
excellent
news.
Point. Yeah, we become the news, or we certainly contribute to it.
Absolutely.
But that Ms. King, your comments also put me in mind of something else that was said in our presentation about how every access point, I believe that was the expression used, of information is geared towards our emotions. And what I have noticed is how headlines are increasingly sensationalized. So I'll read through some headlines on my news feed, which I've set up for a variety of news outlets. I'd like to have a diverse perspective. And I can spend 10 minutes, and at the end of that 10 minutes, I feel like the world's going to end. And I feel like nobody's getting along, and I'm very anxious and I'm very worried. And then if I open and read through the articles and actually get the content, it may be a little less dramatic. We teach our students not only to read an article from top to bottom, but to read something or to research something from side to side, if you will, or we call this lateral searching. So we take some information shared in the article, and then we pull that from the article and we do independent research on it. So if it's a name we don't know or a topic we're not familiar with, we go out and do some more research. But I would like to know how many of you also share a similar experience, just browsing through headlines. Yes, we have a comment. Ms. Linhart.
Mr. Jackson actually has
yes.
A very, very powerful question. As the resident librarian, how would you answer that? Asha?
Okay, so Mr. Jackson is asked in the chat, and Ms. Linhart will come to your comment momentarily. There's so much information that actually is accurate. How do we find that?
Great question.
Great question. So I think it's an ongoing pursuit, and this is where those strategies come in. We don't always have time to do the research that formerly a lot of our reporters and authors did for us, if you will, when we subscribe to magazines or newspapers. And so I think that to have a variety of news sources is good. To have reasonable expectations is another response. We also, sorry, I'm interrupting myself a little bit, but we did put together a resource sheet for today's participants. And so if you would like a copy of that resource sheet about accurate information and some resources that we feel are valid as educators, then please send me an email, and we'll post my email address at the end of today. And I will send that out to you in a PDF form with live links so that you can go to these various sources. Okay, so I hope that helps. Yes.
Ms. Linhart writes, every information on the web came from a source, known or unknown. Information needs to be researched from different known sources to at least verify its validity and reliability. So before we go on to Mr. Buckler's comment, I kind of want to touch a little bit on what Mr. Jackson and Ms. Linhart both have alluded to. Now, Mr. Jackson, and of course, anybody else, would you agree or disagree with someone who might say that individuals generally tend to discredit a source, whether it's veritable or otherwise, simply because it doesn't align with their worldview or paradigm?
So once again, a confirmation bias.
It's a confirmation bias, absolutely. So how would you respond to that, Mr. Jackson, or anybody? And this is just food for thought, because as educators, I really like to put my students in positions where they're going to think critically, which I believe is it's something that unfortunately is becoming extinct in our society, right? So the concept of critical, I mean, I'm hoping not. No, but when we're talking, when we look at Ms. LaGarde's presentation and how we are generally emotionally affected by a story, I believe that our emotions completely contradict and counteract our reasoning abilities, thus making it really difficult for us to think on a critical perspective.
So there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
And when
so the question might be, how might we frame this as a question for everyone? Let's take a moment to reflect. How do we feel when we encounter facts that challenge our beloved opinions, for lack of a better phrase?
Well, Mr. Buckler states that, he goes into various news sources, which I think it's, again, an example of responsible consumer information taken, but
Yes, and he says that he does that for one story.
for one
So
story.
it's very,
Exactly.
so doing sort of a holistic, getting a holistic perspective.
Yeah, so what do you guys think?
So what are some other things? So the pause, I think, allows
if I
us
may,
to hold up our
Sure.
emotions. Sorry. Yeah.
So you were going, you were asking about how we would handle something that we don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
So at some level, I have to be mature enough to recognize that I may be in the wrong, and I have to consider that. And this is the hard part, because this is where individuals have to assume, a big responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I believe so.
Yes. Very good point. Very good point.
So it's sort of a being honest with yourself kind of thing, I think.
Okay. And I think that the emotion needs to be balanced. Yes. And Ms. Linhart responds that the truth, a verified truth, does not become invalid because she speaks in the first person. I disagree with the person who has a different view.
That's, again, an excellent point. And it all comes down to this idea of being responsible consumers. And as I was looking at the presentation that Ms. LaGarde put together for us, that's ultimately what I was able to extract the most. That's what appealed to me the most as a consumer of information. And then it challenged me to think, how much have I been complicit in this idea of disseminating information that may or may not be accurate, or whatever the case might be. And when we take a look at all the info that's out there and the different sources, and we take into account the fact that our emotions play such a critical piece into the information that we choose to share, we really do have to question ourselves, and, like Mr. Jackson said, really have the element of maturity to say, wait a minute, this challenges my belief system. But then, like Ms. Linhart said, just because I disagree with it doesn't necessarily make it false. And that's with everything, guys. We're not talking about any one particular domain here. We're talking about, this is definitely not the best recipe for meatloaf. I disagree. I'm not going to share this on Facebook. Right. And anything from A to Z. So I really do think that having the understanding of how our emotions are, well, I don't want to say the condition, how our emotions are conditioned, and how within the context of that conditioning, we make the decisions to share or not share. I think that's what's going to ultimately lead to us having a more veritable and reputable exchange of information.
Well, I think the word that came to my mind as I was listening to you was manipulation. And I think it's fair to say that marketers and marketing strategies are using our emotions to manipulate a response. And to tie this to a motivation, it has to do with our history lesson at the beginning of the presentation, I think. If we're not paying for our sources of information, and we're speaking so generally here, so I just want to pause and remind us. So we've got news on one hand, we've got retail on the other, we have social media, some fun memes, and if you're like me, I follow stories about giraffes because I like giraffes. So we have all of those different aspects. I tend to rely heavily on sources that I trust and have looked into. I think even there, though, I still need to be responsible. Just because a source that I've gotten good information from before posts something doesn't automatically guarantee its validity. So I need to continue to always look and to always seek. And a question that was posed is, what is the motivation? What is the motivation? If I'm not subscribing to online information, if I'm getting my news stories for free through my social media platform, then how can I in turn hold those sources accountable? Because when I make that exchange, it's an agreement. And so I think that speaks to the point of editorials and opinions because it engages us and gets us all dialoguing and arguing and impassioned. The other takes more time and more money. And those are significant points.
Those are significant points.
So I'd like to invite you to share your reaction. So we are building some strategies here to do a little bit of research, to take responsibility for ourselves, to understand that we can disagree, as Ms. Linhart was saying.
Right.
Mr. Buckler pointing out, look at different sources reporting on the same story. Be aware that when you're shopping, those marketers are naturally going to, if you've looked up a pair of sneakers, they're of course going to show you sneakers for a while because they're trying to help you consume. Right. So what else? What's another strategy? What else do you think? What are your responses? Yes, thank you, Mercedes. Yes, and we'll come to you in a moment, Ms. King. So do you want to read Mercedes'
Sure.
post?
Mercedes said, today information embedded with ideas, words, pictures is disseminated in different format to attract the young through videos, YouTube, and so forth, to prove emotional triggers and for financial gain. Moreover, the mind subjected to such bombardment is indoctrinated over time. I agree 110%. The result may be exhibiting unwanted behaviors. Yeah, exactly.
Very well said. Very to provoke. Yes, and I think perhaps this is why Ms. LaGarde at the end spoke about making healthy choices.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
This is really about self-awareness, knowing what we need, knowing what we're looking for, and being responsible, as said. And then Mr. Buckler says to always try and see both sides of any story. And this applies to so many things. Yes, I think that's a really good approach, Mr. Buckler. Thank you.
Ms. King, you were saying?
Yes.
Just to kind of build off of what Bruce and Mercedes had presented, I think it's also having the ability to be open and to be humble, and also to understand that your views aren't always correct, and also to research, and also to be open to learning something else, or to learning something new, or have a bigger perspective of just what something is at face value.
Yes, and
Exactly.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think that pausing from our emotional arousal in order to be able to think a little bit more is a good idea. So perhaps a first strategy when I'm experiencing that moment of scrolling through and all those headlines making me anxious and sometimes feeling angry or disempowered, these are the negative emotions that might hook me in. When I pause, something I can do is take a deep breath, be aware of how this is all working, some of the factors that are involved, and to understand those factors not as good or bad, but just as factors. In other words, media outlets need to make money in order to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
The more responsible I am in my participation, the more responsible I ask them to be, the more I can influence how they behave and how they participate with me. I hope that made some sense.
It does, and I love the word that you said. You said influence. Now I see a lot of my students are coming in.
Oh, great! Welcome everybody.
Welcome, guys. What do we call those people on social media? Like there's a term for them.
Are you ready?
What is it?
Influencers.
Influencers, right?
Yeah,
And
when in our day it used to be consultant was a big word, but today, are you an influencer?
Influencer,
Yes.
and going back to what Mrs. Linhart had said previously, she said, I'll read it again. Today, information embedded with ideas, words, pictures is disseminated in different format to attract the young, right? Through videos, YouTube. The fact of the matter is that as a society, we're very susceptible to what we see.
Yes, we are
Right.
very susceptible, and it's not in itself a bad thing.
No, it's
we need
not.
to be more savvy, and I think that when we're aware of these algorithms, like Mr. Jackson, you were saying, you did a bit of research. Ms. Berry, your own experience of that moment, and Destiny, you mirrored this as well. You look for something online, and then all of a sudden it's coming at
It
you.
becomes yours, and you end up becoming,
indoctrinated with sneaker advertisements. Whatever
right,
it might
and
be.
it becomes a carbon copy almost of the original, no matter what, whether it's an ideology, whether it's a physical appearance, whether it's and whatever the case might be, right? When we get the information from these individuals who tend to generally cater to our sense of our collective sense of almost wanting to become something else, right? We generally tend to become what we're being fed, and that goes back again. I always like to bring it back to us being responsible consumers of information, and what are we doing with the information that we receive, and how
What are
are
we doing with it?
Yeah, is it
So-
affecting us to the point where we are perpetuating something just because somebody says that it's so, or
So,
are we
and-
actively looking it up?
Are we actively looking? So perhaps one question we might ask ourselves is, what do we need? What do we need when we go online, when we go to our social media platforms? What are we looking for? Are we looking for connection? Because that's a little bit
Right.
implied.
Mhm.
Are we looking for an acceptable identity or sense of self? And is this the best place to be looking for that? And even though you're all on screen, this kind of connection and conversation, I think, is very important for us, in part because it gives us some insight and helps us to remember that we exist outside of social media and information platforms, right? So we seek information for a purpose. And maybe after we take that deep breath with a pause, we can ask ourselves, what am I looking for? What am I doing here on this platform? And then we can direct our intention a little bit more. So what do you think about that? What are some, especially young people, if you don't mind, or some of the students that are here with us, what are some things that you do when you encounter something you find either disturbing or really exciting that you can't wait to share it out? Does anybody want to participate? If you don't feel comfortable taking your mic off, please feel free to use the chat.
I know Shahid is just dying to participate.
Yes, I know all of our students
But
are.
while they're
Miss Haley?
formulating, while they're formulating their thoughts, I kind of want to go back to something that Ms. LaGarde had said in her presentation, and that's the fact that disinformation travels 6 times faster than facts.
Disinformation travels 6 times faster. All right, let's turn that into a question.
One of
Why
them
do you
is-
think that is? Yes, we'll come to your question. We'll come to your comment in a moment, Mr. Jackson. Why do you think, that's a very good point. Why do you think disinformation travels 6 times faster? Now, as a librarian, I'd like to make a little bit of a distinction, and Ellie and I were talking about this too. The distinction between misinformation, where I'm misinformed, and so I perpetuate something that's, think of the word mistake. Oh, most welcome. Thank you for joining, Ms. Berry. And disinformation, where I'm perpetuating information that I'm aware to some degree is untrue. Okay, so dis and misinformation, and it's disinformation that is so false information.
Yeah.
That I don't even like the term. It's like junk food. If it's junk,
Right.
it's not food. So disinformation. So what do you think?
true.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Let me ask the question and invite you to come. And students, please feel free. Just brainstorm with us. No right or wrong here. We're just thinking together. All right, non-students, jump on board.
What was the question?
What was the question? Why do you think disinformation spreads or is shared 6 times faster than quote unquote boring old facts? I believe that was the term
Yeah,
you used.
boring
old
facts.
facts. What is it do you think makes it travel so much faster or engages us? Yes.
Maybe because nobody wants to know about old facts. People want to know about things that can be true or cannot be true, and it can be more drama.
More drama. Interesting. Well said. Thank you. And we have another comment, Haley. It's more interesting. Okay. Okay. Do you want to give us an example? If you think of something.
I think Haley's comment speaks a lot to the fact, again, going back to the very beginning, to how our emotions are intrinsically tied to this.
More drama.
Exactly. You know,
More
if
excitement.
if it's something that is going to cause, excitement, or is going to cause a group to get riled up, then of course the individuals are, 6 times more likely to make sure that information gets moved along, rather than something that might not necessarily be as shock value sells.
Shock value.
Yeah.
So
Well, when I see
yeah.
like the news, I find it boring. But when I hear about drama in school, it's more interesting to gossip about. I love that we have students here because we're actually getting an authentic.
Beautiful.
We're actually getting an authentic take.
So let's read that comment again. When I see like the news, I find it boring. But when I hear about drama in school, it's much more interesting to gossip about. Fair enough. Fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point.
Then it becomes a big game of telephone. Have you guys played telephone in the past? One thing starts at one end, and then by the time it gets to the other end, it becomes something completely different.
Different than what it started out to be.
Right.
How interesting.
Right.
So I have so many thoughts. Any other comments? Did we miss anybody? Bruce, I think you posted something back a little bit. I can't see.
Can we go up a little bit?
Can we scroll up for? Yeah, thank you,
Bruce's
sir.
Yeah, right there.
Right there. One of the misdefined terms regarding social media platforms is that they serve to connect us. And so, Mr. Jackson, you suggest that you don't think this is really the primary purpose. Do you feel comfortable sharing with us what you think the primary purpose really is?
Well, I think it's a tool.
A tool.
But it doesn't really connect us necessarily, because it's not even like talking to somebody on the phone. You're just sort of putting stuff, where other people can see it, but you don't know exactly how they are going to pay attention, if they are paying attention, if they're not paying attention.
Right.
But yeah, I tend to look at social media more like a tool.
Okay.
I can get information and I can get a hold of people if I need to, but it's not all what it was initially. We came in at a good time because we've seen social media from its inception, basically. At this point in history.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing it. The purpose, what they initially said it was, isn't the case, and it's something else. But so my point is that the expectation should be changed.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a good point. And again, sort of, as we were suggesting before, what is my purpose in seeking this information? Is it to have, a good gossip, or is it to find a good place to eat, or is it to inform myself so I know how to make a good choice about a doctor, for example, or whom to vote for? All of those things are different purposes. And so what are our expectations when we use our different platforms? And sometimes I feel connected. I see pictures of my family's birthday parties and things of that nature. On the other hand, sometimes I'm led astray. So I think to know what we're looking for and to discern between our different expectations. Thank you. Well put.
And discernment is definitely critical.
Discernment. And Mr. Buckler has commented and said, great point. We cannot rely on social media for the news. It can be a starting point, but it cannot be relied on. Okay, so
that's true. That is true. It's so subjective, though.
It is very subjective.
It's very subjective, and it's told from the perspective of someone's personal opinion and worldview. It's like you take the actual fact that's going on. And those of us that have Twitter or other social media platforms, we have seen how, several political events or several armed conflicts have developed in these particular platforms from a first-person perspective, where we're seeing what's going on. But if you take two different people from the opposing sides, you're going to get a play-by-play that's significantly different.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
it's
yeah.
I sometimes just as a informal anthropological experiment,
Absolutely.
I read comments. So
The comments are great. The comments are great.
and they can be very enlightening and honestly sometimes a little bit scary. All over the map. And this is where we need to remember things like bots, and really before you click and share, take that moment and think and examine yourself and just be with yourself without necessarily judgment, but just
Right.
what am I experiencing right now?
Yeah.
And if I'm excited to share this, how come? Because that self-awareness, I think, is part of what will nurture us. And Destiny responded to Ms. Linhart, it's an entertainment. So social media is often for entertainment. And it's true. I found some great YouTubes, or I have a cousin who always puts great blues songs on his social media feed. And I love history and old photographs, and so those kinds of things. So we have another comment. I learn a lot more false information on social media than correct information, because I feel like something that is false or makes someone seem bad is more talked about than true information or happy information. So that's something really to think about. And thank you for sharing that, Haley. Yes, Ms. Lenhart is pleased that your student Destiny wrote that comment. So you're suggesting that the negative or false information drives us a little bit more, or is more engaging. And so I'm afraid that sometimes this research that false information travels 6 times as fast is true. So that's a very interesting point, and very much worth thinking about.
And it does make it dangerous, though.
So what, yes, it can be dangerous and misleading, of course. And so what is a comment that you, or a strategy that you might do to counteract that, or improve on that, or deal with that? Do you have an idea? You can take your time, and also good, thank you. Good, all right. So the answer comes, I try not to believe what I see when I first see it. All right, so again, take that moment, think about it. Another question that we may not always be able to answer, and we're coming close to the end of our time together. We have a few more minutes, but another question might be, how are we going to determine whether that's false information? Right? Again, so we're kind of circling back to some of the same questions. How do we know it's false? How do we know when an image has been photoshopped? And sometimes it's common sense. But again, maybe the source of the post or the news article, and the purpose that the purveyor is trying to share. What do they need from us? What do they want from us? And sometimes it's hard to know. Very true comment, Haley. Very true comment. Yes. Nicely said. Yeah.
So as we get ready to wind down, what are some last thoughts from the people that are with us today? What are some of the takeaways from today? Comments, concerns, common concerns, suggestions, or ideas that we can kind of, adopt moving forward. And listen, this was a very brief thing, but this was kind of a feeler, because, we definitely want to continue to have these types of discussions, and we are blessed and fortunate to have the technology and the platform on which to do it. So we definitely want to continue to have these talks. So what are some takeaways from today's discussion? Not to believe false info. Okay, Destiny.
Great. Well said. Not to believe false info. Good. Anybody else? Ms. King. Okay, great. You got it seconded. Read her books. Yes. And they are we're hoping to have them here. And so please keep in touch, Mr. Jackson, and I can help you with that.
Yes.
And they're full of strategy and instructional tools for us as educators, and we can use those with ourselves as well. Ms. King, a takeaway from you?
I just enjoyed my time and listening to your whole conversation in regards to these topics, and I definitely think that having these conversations are very, very important with, going forward and just having an open mind and really diving into, all issues and all aspects of all of this, really.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. And Mr. Buckler, a takeaway from you, please.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I was going to say, I was about to type it, but I think you just need to think twice before sharing anything. I was thinking how gossip is similar to news. You might learn gossip, it might be true, it might be false. Either way, it could be hurtful and not helpful. And the same goes for news. When you read a news story, it may be true. I'm referring to hearing about it on social media, especially, but you may hear a news story which may be true, may be false. Either way, think twice before you reshare it or share it, because whether it's true or false, it could become inflammatory. And as you said, you're going to lend yourself to the narrative, and you're coming at it from a certain perspective. So just be careful what you share and what you repost, and think about why you're resharing it and why you're reposting it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
agree.
you. Well said. Thank you. And Mr. Martinez, do you want to jump in and with just one takeaway for us? You can put it in the chat if you don't feel comfortable taking your mic off. How about Mr. Khan? Or Mr. Patel?
Miss.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Shyama.
We love Shama. We love
Yes, I was misled by the
actually,
picture.
Actually, for the I know they all have pictures of me for some reason.
Yeah.
For those of you who
That's
are
whose picture?
seeing that, my students all decided to prank me by changing their profile picture.
So it's pretty funny. I'm looking at
Profile
6
picture.
images of
So
Mr.
there's
Espinoza here.
there's 6 Mr. Espinozas. So we have a minute left. So why don't you and I just kind of give our
Great.
kind of takeaway from today. So the one thing that I really want to encourage all of us to do is just to understand the power that we have as consumers. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Understand the power that we have as consumers, and understand that we essentially become the news when we go ahead and share information that is both accurate or inaccurate, whatever the case might be. So I want to encourage everybody to just educate ourselves in continuing to be great and healthy consumers of the information, so that we can contribute to actual facts getting out there rather than opinion. So
That's great. Thank you.
you're very welcome.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Thank you again to our tech team for making this possible and so easy for us.
Yes.
And thank you to the American Library Association for the funds that made this possible. And thank you to all of you for coming today.
Have a great
And
afternoon, everybody.
have a great afternoon, and we look forward to hearing from you. And if you'd like that resource list, please send me an email, and the next screen has my email on it.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.